A widowed entrepreneur brought his unnoticed assistant to a prestigious charity gala, but what she did there would leave every guest stunned. Mia Langley had been working at the expansive home of Elias Carroll, a name synonymous with cold, precision, and financial success, for nearly 4 years. She was meticulous, quiet, and kept to herself. Never once in all that time did she expect her employer to engage her beyond tasks and instructions, much less invite her to an event among the elite. But that morning, as she was organizing receipts in his office, Elias called her name with his usual blunt tone. "I need you to accompany me to an event tonight," he said without looking up from his phone. "It's a formal fundraiser. Important people. You're coming. That's not a request. It's a directive. Be presentable and stay quiet." He didn't offer a smile or even wait for her answer. It wasn't a suggestion. Mia, stunned, felt the command strike her like a sudden gust of cold air. She nodded silently. There was no room for discussion, just a strange tangle of opportunity and dread winding in her chest. She sensed the night would demand something different from her. She just didn't yet know what. That evening, Mia arrived at the Opaline Grand Hall in a modest but elegant sapphire gown, something she had kept unworn for years, waiting for a moment that never seemed to come. Elias was already at the entrance, dressed immaculately in black and silver, his expression marked with impatience. His eyes slid over her like she were a paperclip, and he gave only a curt, "Come." As they walked in, his hand never reached for hers. He strode ahead and she followed. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers, violin music, and polished confidence. Eyes turned as they entered. Elias was known to every head of industry present. Mia, unknown and unrecognized, drew curious glances and hushed murmurs. She felt them, the judgment, the confusion. She walked with her shoulders back and her gaze forward. When they reached the circular table in the center of the room, Elias gave a passing introduction. "This is Mia," he said vaguely, waving a hand. "She's accompanying me tonight." He didn't say her full name. He didn't explain who she was. Around the table sat 3 figures, 2 men in their 60s and a woman in her 50s with striking gray curls and sharp green eyes. These were the benefactors Elias had been courting for weeks. The talk turned quickly to fiscal responsibility, donor influence, campaign optics. Mia listened, absorbing, not interrupting. Her eyes followed each speaker carefully. She took in every detail, even the way they held their wine glasses when discussing something they disliked. It was during a breaking conversation when one of the investors, Mr. Corvin, leaned slightly toward her and asked with patronizing charm, "And what about you, Mia? I imagine this must all feel a bit overwhelming. First gala?" The tone was clearly condescending, expecting a bashful response or perhaps an awkward laugh. But Mia looked at him evenly and replied with calm certainty. "On the contrary, it's enlightening. It's interesting how people often dress strategy in the language of charity, but impact doesn't wear a tuxedo." The table went still. Daria Vale, the woman across from her, leaned forward slightly, intrigued. Corvin's brow lifted, and Elias visibly tensed. He didn't look at Mia, but she felt the wave of displeasure roll off him. She had spoken clearly, intelligently, and publicly, something he had not invited her to do. Yet the others, for the first time that evening, looked at Mia not as an appendage, but as a presence. The conversation shifted with newfound energy. Daria began including Mia in occasional asides. Corvin laughed once, genuinely, at one of her insights about the way public funding narratives affect grassroots action. Elias, meanwhile, sat like a shadow. She had gone off script. She had presence. And that was not what he wanted. When the topic turned to social equity in tech, Daria asked, "Elias, does Carroll Systems have any current outreach initiatives in education?" Elias hesitated, his mouth open, searching for a polished non-answer. But Mia spoke first, her voice even and assured. "I believe outreach is essential not for image, but for legacy. A company that innovates without inclusion becomes a machine, not a movement." Her words drew silence. Eyes turned. Even a few at nearby tables glanced over. Daria smiled like she'd been waiting all evening to hear someone say just that. Elias, however, flushed just slightly. His fingers curled around the stem of his glass. "It's easy to comment when you've never borne the pressure of steering a corporation," he said coolly, addressing her directly for the first time all night. "Maybe leave the analysis to those who've earned it." Mia didn't look away. "You're right. I haven't made leadership decisions, but I've lived under them. and sometimes those who serve see more clearly than those who command. The blow was soft-spoken but precise. Corvin leaned back, Daria grinned, and Elias was silent. When the dinner finally ended, Elias didn't wait. He stood abruptly, muttered a stiff goodbye to the table, and strode toward the exit without glancing back. Mia, left alone to gather her things, didn't chase him. She walked out moments later, unhurried. Her heels clicked softly along the marble floor, her head held high. That evening hadn't crushed Herod, had ignited something. But she had no idea Elias was already planning his response. 6:40. Back at the estate, the silence in the main hallway was heavy. Elias's voice called her into his office before she could retreat upstairs. She entered slowly, the click of the door behind her sounding final. He stood by the fireplace, his posture taut, fists resting against the mantel as if holding himself upright. "What the hell were you thinking?" he asked, his tone cold and dangerous. Mia remained composed, her hands folded lightly in front of her. "I was asked a question," she said evenly. "I answered it." Elias turned toward her, his expression sharp. "You were there to be discreet, present, not to start a debate at my table." His voice rose, tight with frustration. "You're my assistant, Mia. You aren't paid to share your thoughts with people who could decide the future of my work." "Then why did you take me?" she asked, her voice quiet but unwavering. "If you needed silence, you could have gone alone." Elias stepped closer. His anger was colder now, almost mechanical. "You were performing a function, that's all." He paused, eyes narrowing. "But instead, you decided to become the center of attention. You've overstepped. Consider this your final day here." The words landed like a sentence, but Mia didn't react with desperation. She stood straighter, nodded once, and left the room without another word. That night, she packed her few belongings from the small guest room she lived in for years. But just as she was folding the last of her clothes, her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize flashed on the screen. She answered, and a familiar voice greeted her. "Miss Langley, this is Daria Vale. I was wondering how would you feel about joining my foundation." The call left her speechless for a moment. Daria continued, "We need someone who sees what most people ignore. Someone like you." With a breath caught between disbelief and fierce determination, Mia said yes. That same week, she began working under Daria's guidance at the Vale Initiative, an organization dedicated to educational equity and technological access. Under Daria's mentorship, Mia thrived. She wasn't just included, she was valued. Her insight, once dismissed as overstepping, now helped shape policy directions. She spoke at panels, led outreach efforts, and slowly became a recognized voice in philanthropic circles. Meanwhile, across town, Elias Carroll's situation worsened. His company, Carroll Systems, was bleeding talent. Several investors began pulling out. His focus on image over innovation had caught up with him. Desperate, Elias began selling shares, trying to salvage control. But what he didn't know until it was too late was that a significant portion of those shares had been acquired by the Vale Initiative. When Elias entered the boardroom of a leadership summit weeks later, he froze. There, seated at the head of the table, reviewing the latest financials, was Mia. She didn't blink. She didn't gloat. She merely greeted him with the same poise he had once dismissed as unremarkable. "Mr. Carroll," she said with a nod. "So, you're here," he said after a moment, his voice strained. "With them." Mia kept her gaze steady. "Yes, and as you can see, the initiative now holds a controlling interest in Carroll Systems." He scoffed quietly, the sound sharp like cracked glass. "You really think you know how to run a business now?" She replied, "Number, but I know what one looks like when it forgets its purpose, and I learned that from you." He stepped closer, his voice low. "Don't let this go to your head, Mia. You're still the girl who used to fetch my dry cleaning." Mia didn't flinch. "And you're still the man who thought being listened to was the same as being respected." The air between them thickened. She leaned forward slightly. "If you think I'm here for revenge, you're wrong. I'm here to rebuild what you let fall apart." He said nothing. He didn't need to. The tremor in his jaw, the stillness in his armsit told her everything. She turned away, and for the first time, Elias Carroll was left standing in silence, not out of choice, but because he had nothing left to say. The confrontation lingered with Elias for days. For the first time, he couldn't outrun a conversation, couldn't bury it under a contract, or dismiss it with a signature. He sat in his study at night, surrounded by glass and silence, thinking not of his collapsing empire but of the look Mia gave him, not bitter, not triumphant, but resolute. That, somehow, stung the most. It forced him to see himself without the armor of wealth and reputation. A week later, Elias and Mia were both summoned to a high-stakes investors meeting regarding the company's future. The financial reports were grim. Losses had accelerated, and public trust had eroded. Elias arrived early, jaw set, papers clutched too tightly. Mia entered minutes later, calm, deliberate, and clearly prepared. Mr. Winslow, the board's chairman, opened the meeting with no ceremony. Mr. Carroll, this is your final opportunity to convince us that you can still lead this company out of crisis. Elias began with controlled confidence. He spoke of restructuring, new partnerships, streamlining operations. His tone was rehearsed, corporate, but the investors looked unconvinced. They had heard this script before. Then Mia stood. Without notes, she spoke of people employees who hadn't been paid in weeks, communities promised inclusion but forgotten, the disconnect between the company's image and its actions. She spoke not to impress, but to inform, to challenge. As she talked, Elias felt himself shrink beside her. The investors didn't just listen to her, they leaned in. When she finished, the room stayed quiet for several seconds. Then Mr. Winslow nodded slowly. Miss Langley, please prepare a full proposal. Your direction may be what we've needed. Elias didn't speak. He couldn't. He had come to save his company. She had come to save its soul. In the hallway afterward, Elias approached her. His face was hard to read, less arrogant, more human. Why are you doing this? He asked quietly. Why help me after everything? Mia paused. Her expression softened just slightly. Because I care about what this company could be, and because the people inside it deserve more than the version of you I used to work for. He watched her walk away again, just like that night at the gala, and something inside him shifted. He didn't know what to call it, shame maybe, or the quiet seed of change. Whatever it was, it lingered. That evening, Elias sat alone in his dark office, rereading reports he'd ignored for months. For once, he didn't look at profit margins. He read employee testimonials, community complaints, internal audits. The numbers didn't lie, but the people behind them mattered more. He saw that now. 2 days later, the board called for a follow-up meeting. Tension was thick. Elias had prepared an alternate, plain and aggressive investor deal that could infuse immediate capital but required handing influence to a third party. Mia presented her plan first, stabilizing the budget, reallocating executive salaries, reactivating outreach programs. She emphasized sustainability and transparency over speed. The board was impressed. But Elias interrupted. I understand Mia's proposal, he said, standing. But we need something bold, a signal to the market that we're still strong. I've secured a potential investor willing to commit a significant sum. We just have to offer him a seat at the table regarding community programs. Mia's jaw tightened. That compromises our core values. We're not selling vision for liquidity. Elias stepped forward. We're not selling anything. We're surviving. The room grew tense. Mr. Winslow raised a hand. We'll review both proposals. Come back in 72 hours with a unified plan or we'll make a decision without you. That night, Elias stayed late in his office, surrounded by glowing screens and silence. He pulled up the contract again. The investor, a man named Garnett, had already sent terms. Elias stared at the line offering soft influence over philanthropic direction. It didn't sound harmful, but he knew Mia would see it differently. And worse, he knew she'd be right. The next morning, Elias met Garnett at a private lounge. Without telling Mia or the board, he signed the preliminary agreement. The cash transfer would arrive within the week. When the deal was done, Elias felt a strange mix of pride and dread. He was acting, leading, but part of him also knew he'd just made a familiar mistake, wrapped in new packaging. Mia found out 2 days later. Word of the deal had reached one of the program directors. She stormed into Elias's office during a video call with Garnett, her eyes blazing. Elias paused, tried to close the call, but she had already heard enough. When the screen went black, she stood there, arms crossed, the weight of betrayal radiating off her in silence. You went around us, she said. Again, Elias stood slowly. It was necessary. The board was growing impatient. We needed funds. This was clean, quick, effective. Mia's voice dropped. You handed a piece of our future to someone who sees charity as branding. You don't understand what you just did. Elias tried to hold his ground. He won't interfere. Mia shook her head. He already has, with a signature. Her voice was tight with anger, but beneath it was something deeper, disappointment. You haven't changed. You're just dressing your control in a new suit. You still don't trust anyone but yourself. Elias was silent. "Why do you always assume I'll fail?" he asked suddenly. "Why do you treat me like I'm unworthy of this second chance?" She stared at him for a long moment. "Because you keep proving it." Then she left the office. This time she didn't look back. The fallout was immediate. At the next board meeting, Mia laid out her concerns with composed precision. "This investor agreement undermines the ethical foundation we've spent months trying to rebuild. If we allow outsiders to manipulate the community programs, then nothing we promise holds meaning." The room grew still. Mr. Winslow turned to Elias. "Is this true? Did you authorize a deal without board consultation?" Elias nodded, the smallest movement. His voice was low. "Yes, I believed it was a strategic necessity." The silence after was long and weighty. Finally, Winslow responded. "Then we'll need to revisit your authority here. This may result in suspension of executive privileges." Elias felt the air vanish from the room. Mia didn't look at him. She had said her part. After the meeting, Elias sat alone in the hallway, his thoughts loud and disordered. He wasn't angry not like before, he was tired. For the first time, he began to wonder if Mia had never been his enemy at all. Maybe she had been the only one brave enough to hold a mirror to his face. And maybe that was what frightened him most. That night, for the first time in years, Elias went home and didn't open his laptop. He just sat in silence. In the days that followed, he didn't call meetings, didn't check market dashboards. Instead, he began to read internal reports, community letters, things he had once skimmed or ignored. Each sentence carved something into him. He started to see how the pursuit of power had blinded him to the cost of his decisions on others and on himself. He realized how much Mia had been trying to show him long before she ever said it aloud. One morning, Mia found him already in the office before sunrise, poring over social program documentation. She watched him silently for a moment before speaking. "What are you looking for?" Elias didn't turn. "A way back to the beginning," he said quietly, "before I decided that winning meant standing alone." Mia stepped inside. "You can't fix everything in one gesture. It takes time, patience, accountability." He nodded. "Then I'll start with one thing." That same week, he proposed a full internal review of all third-party influence. He terminated the contract with Garnett, returned the investment, and took full responsibility before the board. His executive privileges were limited but not revoked. For once, he didn't fight it. He accepted it. Mia, though still wary, began to observe his shift. He started attending community outreach sessions not to speak, but to listen. One project in particular struck him deeply, a program teaching coding skills to formerly incarcerated women. One of the participants, a woman named Eliza, shared her story. "I never thought anyone would invest in me again, but someone here did." She looked at Mia when she said it, but Elias felt the words press against his chest like a challenge. After that session, he asked Mia to take him to more. They visited food, co-ops, urban gardens, digital literacy centers. Everywhere they went, Elias stopped trying to speak for the company. He asked questions. He sat in silence. He helped unload crates. The staff began to see him less as a figurehead, more as a man trying slowly to change. Back in the office, the shift was subtle but real. Elias began collaborating with the program teams. He deferred to Mia often, not as a favor, but out of respect. She had earned it. During a late-night document review, Elias looked across the table at her and said softly, "You were right. This isn't about legacy or market share. It's about service." Mia didn't smile, but her eyes softened. "Then prove it every day." He did. In the following months, Elias continued showing up at every meeting, on every site, with humility and consistency. Slowly, even the board began to see the difference. He no longer framed reports around return on investment. He spoke about outcomes, lives, impact. Mia remained vigilant, but her posture around him began to thaw. She stopped treating him like a warning and more like a possibility. As they spent more time working side by side, something deeper began to surface. They began talking about things beyond work family, past mistakes, dreams neither had said aloud in years. One night, after a long planning session, they sat in the empty office together, the city's lights glittering beyond the window. Elias spoke first. "I was wrong about everything, especially about you." Mia looked at him, not with pity, but with understanding. "I wanted to hate you," she said, "but I couldn't. I kept seeing the man you could be." Elias's voice caught slightly. "And now?" She paused. "Now I see him." That night, they walked together through the quiet city blocks. No declarations, no grand gestures. Just something between them that hadn't been there before, or maybe had always been, waiting for the noise to fall away. Weeks passed, and their bond deepened. They moved through strategy sessions like dance partners. Board meetings became more collaborative. Community leaders began calling Elias by his first name, asking his opinion not as a donor, but as a peer. In private moments, he and Mia shared stories, meals, even laughter. Something tender was growing, slowly and surely. One afternoon, during a break between sessions, Elias said softly, "You've changed everything for me, Mia. I don't just mean the company." She looked at him for a long moment, then said, "Then maybe it's time we stop calling this change and start calling it who you really are." He didn't speak again. He just reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. As the foundation expanded, their relationship became public but not dramatic. It was professional, steady, and clear. Their connection fueled their mission. Their mission deepened their connection. Together, they led the company not only into profitability, but into purpose. Recognition came. Awards, profiles, invitations to global summits. But for Mia and Elias, the real success was quieter. It lived in the stories of people they helped. The single father who started a coding academy, the refugee family who opened a bakery, the former employee Elias had once fired, now hired back to lead a department with dignity. A year later, under a summer sky and the scent of garden roses, Mia and Elias were married in a small private ceremony. Friends, colleagues, and community members gathered, many of whom owed their second chance to the two people standing at the altar. Their vows weren't about forever. They were about service, honesty, and continuing to become the people they once only pretended to be. As the sun set and music played, Elias held Mia close, his lips near her ear. "You saved me," he whispered. She smiled and whispered back, "No, you just stopped running." And together, they didn't look back.